The city glittered far below Ethan Cross's mansion, its lights shimmering against the endless stretch of glass that framed his silent world. Once he used to look down at those lights and feel pride, a man who had built an empire from nothing. Now all he saw was distance. The view mocked him with a reminder of everything he could touch, but no longer feel. The accident had taken more than mobility from his leg. It had taken the spark they used to live in his chest. Nights came heavy and still. The echo of his late wife's laughter lingered in the corners of the house, haunting and hollow. Every sound, the ticking clock, the soft hum of the city, seemed to press against him like a weight he could no longer lift. When his private nurse resigned unexpectedly, Ethan didn't protest. He told his assistant to find someone capable. It didn't matter who. No one stayed long anyway. They all left eventually, frightened by his coldness, or worse, by his silence. The next afternoon, he heard a soft knock at his study door. His assistant entered first, followed by a young woman clutching a small leather bag. Her hair was neatly tied back, her hands clasped tightly together. She couldn't have been older than 24. There was a gentleness in her eyes that made Ethan look away too quickly. "Mr. Cross," his assistant began, "this is Sophie Evans, your new living caretaker." Ethan gave a curt nod, barely glancing up from the papers on his desk. "You'll find everything you need down the hall. My schedule is fixed. Breakfast at 7:00, therapy at 10:00. Don't interrupt me otherwise." "Yes, sir," Sophie said softly. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was no fear in it, just quiet determination. As the door closed behind them, Ethan exhaled slowly. Something about her presence lingered, a calm warmth that reached the coldest corners of his chest. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself she was just another temporary face in a long line of caretakers. But that night, as he sat by the window with the city sprawled beneath him, Ethan caught himself thinking of her voice, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel quite so endless. Sophie Evans had never seen a house so large or so lifeless. The marble floors reflected the morning sun, but there was no warmth in their glow. Every wall, every hallway seemed to whisper the same thing. He doesn't let anyone close. Still, she wasn't easily intimidated. Sophie had worked with difficult patients before, lonely souls trapped in silence, aching more from the heart than the body. But Ethan Cross was different. There was something in his eyes when she first met him, something heavy, unspoken. It wasn't arrogance. It was pain he'd learned to hide too well. Her first morning in the mansion began with quiet footsteps and the soft scent of coffee. She carried his tray to the sunroom where he sat, wheelchair angled toward the skyline. The view was breathtaking, but his eyes weren't on it. They were far away, locked somewhere she couldn't reach. "Good morning, Mr. Cross," she said gently, setting the tray beside him. He gave a brief nod, not looking up. "You're early. I find it's better that way," she replied, smiling. The city's calmer in the morning. For a moment he said nothing. Then his gaze shifted toward her, slow, assessing. "You talk too much for someone who's supposed to be quiet help." She blushed faintly. "And you listen too closely for someone who pretends not to care." That earned her the smallest lift of his eyebrow, not quite a smile, but close. Sophie turned to pour his coffee, pretending not to notice the flicker of curiosity behind his calm expression. Over the next few days, she moved through his routines with quiet grace, helping him with therapy, adjusting his blanket when he fell asleep in the study, leaving fresh flowers in the hall, though he never acknowledged them. But sometimes when she walked past the open doorway, she could feel his gaze following her. Not possessive, not unkind, just curious, as if her gentleness confused him. One evening, As she helped him from his chair to the couch, their hands brushed. His skin was warm against hers, too long deprived of touch. The brief contact made them both still. "Careful," he murmured, his voice low. She nodded, eyes lowered. "I am," and in that small, delicate silence, something fragile began to shift between them. Not love yet, but the quiet beginning of it. The third week brought a quiet rhythm to the mansion. Sophie had learned Ethan's moods the way a musician learns notes. Soft in the morning, sharp when in pain, distant when memory crept in. She didn't pry. She simply stayed calm, steady, patient. Ethan had noticed. He noticed how she never flinched when his temper flared during therapy, how she smiled faintly even when he ignored her small talk, how her hands, though delicate, never trembled when helping him walk the short distance from his chair to the pool for his water exercises. It unnerved him, her gentleness. It reached places his grief had sealed off years ago. That afternoon, the sunlight spilled through the skylight above the pool. Sophie stood beside him, sleeves rolled to her elbows, voice low as she guided him into the water. "Hold on to me if you need balance," she said. "I don't need," he began, but his foot slipped slightly on the submerged step. Her hand caught his arm instantly, firm but careful. Their eyes met close enough that he could see the tiny flecks of gold in her brown irises. She didn't let go. "See," she whispered, a nervous laugh breaking the tension. "Even strong men need help sometimes." For the first time in months, he laughed, a quiet, surprised sound that startled them both. Her face softened. "There it is," she murmured. "You should do that more often." When the session ended, she helped him out of the pool, draping a towel gently over his shoulders. Water trailed down his skin, catching the light, revealing the faint scars that crossed his back. Sophie hesitated, fingers trembling before she spoke. "They don't make you less, you know," she said softly. "They make you real." Ethan froze. No one had ever said that to him, not even his doctors. Later that night, long after Sophie had gone to her room, Ethan sat by the window again, but the city didn't feel quite as far away. Her words still echoed in his mind, "They make you real." And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't broken beyond repair. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the sky was a pale wash of evening gold. The next, thunder cracked across it like a warning shot. Rain lashed against the mansion's glass walls, the sound echoing through every corridor like a heartbeat. Ethan was in the library when the lights flickered out. The sudden darkness made him tense, not out of fear, but habit. He hated losing control of his surroundings. He reached for his cane, ready to find his way to the generator, when the door creaked open. "Mr. Cross," Sophie's voice trembled in the dark. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said, though the irritation in his tone was mostly to hide the strange relief he felt hearing her voice. She stepped closer, carrying a small candle she'd found in the kitchen. Its soft flame painted her face in golden shadow, making her look like something out of a dream. The room glowed in pockets, the firelight, the rain, her eyes. "You shouldn't be walking in the dark," she said quietly. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You think I'm afraid of the dark." "No," she murmured. "I think you've been in it too long." That silenced him. She set the candle down beside him and noticed the edge of his shirt slipping open, revealing part of the scar that ran down his chest. Without thinking, she reached forward, her fingers brushing the mark gently. He stiffened not from pain, but from the shock of touch. "They're not ugly," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "They're proof that you survived." Her words struck deeper than she could have known. For years, Ethan had seen his scars as a reminder of failure, a cruel map of loss. But now, under her gaze, they felt almost human. He reached for her wrist, his touch. "Shike but steady. You don't know what you're saying," he whispered. "I'm not someone you can fix. Maybe I'm not trying to," she replied. "Maybe I just see someone worth caring for." Something in him gave way. The distance he had built so carefully began to crumble. He leaned forward slowly, close enough to feel her breath catch. For one suspended moment it felt inevitable. His lips hovering near hers, the storm roaring outside, the air between them trembling with everything unspoken. But then he pulled back. "You deserve someone whole," he said hoarsely. Sophie's eyes glistened in the candle light. "Maybe wholeness isn't what I'm looking for," she whispered. He said nothing. The storm outside raged on, but inside the silence was louder, thick with longing neither dared to name. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the mansion, not in thunder or rain, but in the quiet tension that filled the space between them. Since that night in the library, Ethan and Sophie moved around each other carefully, their conversations shorter, their glances longer. Sophie tried to focus on her duties, his medication, his meals, the endless appointments, but she couldn't shake the memory of how close he'd been, how his breath had brushed her lips before. He stopped himself. It had been just a moment, yet it had changed everything. One evening, as she entered the study, she heard his voice, low, rough, and tired, drifting from a phone call. "No, I haven't tried to see anyone," he was saying. "You don't understand, Marcus. I'm not that man anymore. I'm too broken to love again." Sophie froze. The words hit her harder than they should have. She slipped quietly away before he could notice her, retreating to the kitchen where she stood alone for a long time, heart pounding. She shouldn't care. He was her employer. But every soft word, every guarded look had built something fragile inside her. Something she could no longer hide. That night she couldn't sleep. The house was silent, the air heavy with things unsaid. Finally she rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and walked down the dim hall to his study. He was there as always, seated near the fire, a glass untouched on the table, his face shadowed by thought. When he saw her, surprise flickered in his eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I heard what you said earlier." His expression hardened. "You were listening." "I didn't mean to," she said, voice trembling. "But maybe you need someone to listen." He looked away, jaw tightening. "You shouldn't get involved, Sophie. I'm not someone you can save." "I'm not trying to save you," she whispered. I understand what it's like to be afraid of love." His eyes found hers again, sharp with curiosity. "You?" She nodded. "I've never been with anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was scared of giving myself to someone who wouldn't stay." The confession hung in the air like a heartbeat. Something in Ethan's chest cracked open. Walls, the guilt, the years of silence. For the first time, he saw not the gentle caretaker, but a woman who carried her own fears, her own emptiness, just like him. He didn't reach for her. He only whispered almost to himself, "Then maybe we're both learning." And in that shared, quiet ache, they began to heal, not through touch, but through truth. The days that followed their late night confession carried a fragile kind of peace. Something had shifted between them, unspoken yet unmistakable. The mansion, once cold and echoing, now felt alive with quiet moments. The way Sophie's laughter softened his mornings, the way Ethan's voice grew gentler when he said her name. Healing came slowly, like dawn light creeping through curtains. Ethan began to let her closer, not just in proximity, but in truth. He allowed her to help him walk again, step by step, across the sunroom floor. Sometimes he stumbled, every time she caught him. One evening after therapy, he lingered by the fireplace, his hand resting lightly on hers. The house was silent except for the sound of rain against the glass, soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. "You shouldn't keep helping me like this," he said quietly. "It's not your job to hold me up." Sophie smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not about holding you up," she whispered. "Maybe it's about walking beside you." He looked at her, then really looked. The candle light caught the curve of her cheek, the shimmer in her eyes. She was no longer just the girl who had entered his house out of duty. She was the warmth that had melted his years of solitude. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're shaking," he murmured. "So are you," she whispered back. For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them was thick with everything they had tried not to feel. Longing, fear, hope, and something much deeper than desire. When he finally drew her into his arms, it wasn't desperate. It was slow, careful, a merging of loneliness and tenderness. His lips met her forehead, her temple, her cheek. Each touch was a promise spoken without words. She leaned against him, her voice barely audible. "Slide in slowly," she murmured, the words trembling from both nerves and trust. "You feel too big." Ethan's chest tightened, not from lust, but from the raw emotion of being seen, wanted, accepted. He pulled her closer, his voice low against her hair. "Then I'll go slowly," he said softly, "until you're no longer afraid." They stayed that way for a long time, not lost in passion, but in peace. It was the night they crossed an invisible line between fear and love, between two broken hearts, learning how to fit together again, gently, completely. Morning light spilled softly through the tall windows, chasing away the shadows of the night before. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hush so still that even the air seemed to hold its breath. Ethan stirred awake first. Sophie lay against his chest, her breathing slow. Her fingers curled lightly around his hand. For a moment, he didn't move. He just watched her, the rise and fall of her chest, the peaceful expression on her face. It had been years since he'd woken up beside anyone. The warmth, the nearness felt almost unreal, but then the doubt began to whisper. That old familiar voice that reminded him of who he had been and what he had lost. "You don't deserve this, you'll only hurt her too." He shifted slightly, careful not to wake her, but she stirred anyway, blinking drowsily. "You're awake," she said softly, her voice still wrapped in sleep. He nodded, forcing a small smile. "You should rest. You've done more than enough for me." Her brow furrowed, sensing the distance in his tone. "Ethan," he turned away. "Last night shouldn't have happened," he said quietly. "You're kind, Sophie. You've given me more than I deserve, but I can't give you what you're looking for." She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her. "And what do you think I'm looking for?" "Someone whole," he murmured. "Someone who isn't trapped in the past." Sophie's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "You think love waits for perfection. You think it only belongs to the unbroken. You said nothing. You couldn't. I didn't come here to fix you," she continued. "I came because I saw something in you. Something worth believing in, and maybe I needed to believe too." Her words struck him harder than he expected. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't angry. She was just honest. That honesty scared him more than anything. When she left the room, the silence that followed felt colder than it ever had before. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring out at the city below. He told himself love was a wound that never healed, but now watching her walk away, he realized something far worse. He'd finally found someone who made him want to heal, and he didn't know how. The following week passed. Uneasy silence. Sophie kept her distance, polite, professional, but quieter than before. Ethan tried to focus on work, drowning himself in meetings and documents he barely read. Yet no amount of distraction could quiet the ache that lingered whenever he passed the room that still smelled faintly of her perfume. He wanted to apologize, to tell her he hadn't meant those words, but pride and fear made him wait too long. It was a gray afternoon when the past came knocking quite literally. A familiar voice echoed in the entryway, sharp and controlled. "Ethan, are you really hiding from everyone now?" He froze at the sound. Isabella, his late wife's sister, elegant, poised, and perpetually assessing the world as if everything were beneath her. She stepped into his study without waiting for permission, her heels clicking like accusations. Her eyes swept the room before landing on Sophie, who had just entered with a tray of tea. "Oh, Isabella said, her tone cutting. I see you found company. Sophie blinked, uncertain. I was just bringing. I know what you're bringing. Isabella interrupted, smirking. You caretakers always find a way to blur the line between duty and opportunity. Enough, Ethan said sharply, his voice like stone. She's here because I asked her to be. Really? Isabella crossed her arms. Funny, I didn't realize you were hiring based on innocence now. She's very young. Sophie set the tray down, her hands trembling slightly. I should go, she whispered, glancing at Ethan. But his silence, born not of agreement, but of shock, struck her like a blow. Isabella's voice softened, falsely sweet. You can't keep filling the void with substitutes, Ethan. You'll only end up alone again. That was the breaking point. Sophie turned, walked out, her eyes glistening, but her steps steady. She didn't wait for him to follow. She already knew he wouldn't. By the time Ethan found his voice, the door had already closed behind her. House felt instantly emptier. Isabella said something else, but he didn't hear it. His chest tightened painfully, and for the first time in years, he wheeled himself outside into the rain, not caring about the cold. He had spent years living in shadows of the past, but now, for the first time, he feared losing the one person who made him feel alive again. And as the rain fell harder, Ethan whispered into the storm, "What have I done?" The city hummed quietly around the small clinic where Sophie had found refuge. She moved through the halls with her usual grace, tending to patients with soft words and gentle hands, but no matter how calm she appeared, the ache of leaving Ethan's mansion and the unanswered questions in her heart followed her like a shadow. Ethan arrived unexpectedly that afternoon. He hadn't planned it. He had only known one thing with certainty. He could not let her go without speaking the truth. The receptionist looked at him with surprise. Mr. Cross. He gave a small nod, ignoring the curiosity in the room. His eyes were searching, scanning the faces until they landed on her. Sophie froze mid-step. A box of supplies clutched tightly to her chest. Ethan, she breathed, unsure whether relief or frustration dominated her expression. I needed to find you, he said, voice steady but low. No more excuses, no more waiting. A small crowd had gathered, curious about the billionaire in the hallway. He ignored them, his focus entirely on Sophie. I've been a fool, he continued, taking a careful step closer. I let fear and guilt keep me from what I truly wanted, from what I needed from you. Her hands trembled, but she didn't turn away. Ethan, no, he said gently, lifting one of her hands to his lips. Let me finish. His eyes, dark and vulnerable, locked on hers. You didn't come here to fix me. You came here because you saw me, all of me, and I see you too. Not just the girl who cares for me, but the woman I've been too scared to love. The murmurs of the crowd faded around them. He didn't care who was watching. I can't promise I'm perfect, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly, but I can promise this. I want to try with you, only you if you'll let me. Sophie's chest tightened as the words sank in. No judgment, no excuses, no hidden agendas, only truth. Slowly, she stepped forward, letting him take her hands in his. You've already tried, she said softly, and I think you've already won me. A quiet cheer broke out from the crowd, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant. In that moment, nothing mattered except the two of them. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to hope fully, completely, and without fear. And as they stood together in the softly lit hallway, he whispered, barely audible over the hum of the city, "Thank you for believing in me, in us." She smiled, leaning her forehead against his always. The mansion was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, it felt warm, not just from the light, but from the presence of someone who truly belonged there. Ethan wheeled himself slowly through the halls, his eyes scanning every familiar corner with a sense of wonder. Each room held memories of solitude, of longing, of a heart that had been carefully locked away. But now, with Sophie beside him, even the shadows seemed to soften. She walked with him, her hand brushing against his as they moved. Neither spoke. At first, words were unnecessary. The The silence was full of understanding, of trust, of all the small, tender moments that had led them here. Finally, they reached the room where it had begun, the room where the storm had raged and vulnerability had first sparked between them. Sophie paused, turning to him with a gentle smile. "It feels different now," she said softly. Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It does, because you're here." He took her hands in his, holding them carefully as if afraid to let go. "You fit perfectly," he whispered, his voice low and certain. "Right where you belong." Sophie's eyes shimmered. "And you fit perfectly, too," she replied, leaning closer. They embraced slowly, deliberately, savoring the warmth and security they had both longed for. No rush, no expectation, just two hearts that had been broken and were now mending together. Every gentle touch, every quiet sigh was a promise of care, love, and healing. Hours could have passed, or maybe just moments. Time no longer mattered. They simply existed in each other's presence, letting the weight of the past lift, letting the promise of the future settle softly between them. Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I could feel this again," he admitted. Sophie smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You just needed someone patient enough to wait and brave enough to stay." And in that shared, quiet space, the mansion and their hearts finally felt whole. Two souls once lost in their own darkness had found their way back to each other. It was more than love.